to the Stable Cafe, and the folks who came all the way from Cincinnati. Why not? Okay, I'm going to start with this is a poem that came out of a visit to New York last fall, and specifically to Occupy Wall Street. They didn't call it Zuccotti Park when I lived in New York in the 80s and was a temp secretary on the 15th floor of one of the buildings facing it, and would escape from my job on lunch break. Anyway, so I was back, and I liked how it had changed. So this is called A Clear Enough Sonnet. We're here. We're unclear. Get used to it, reads the young man's handmade sign at the edge of Occupy Wall Street, where the gawkers pass and the shadows of the unindicted in banks of offices fall. And scriveners cross to work, preferring not to, including me, 30 years ago, a temporary kind of person up there on the 15th floor. Just his age, I'd guess. He stands in the little unbeautiful square they called Liberty Place I escaped to on lunch break, inwardly screaming, hungry, because a person gets hungry in the cold with only a sign. He stands above the camouflaged money green of the 10-cent shelters by the one bedraggled tree that grew unplanted out of rubble, like the recurring desire to overturn a prevalent system of thought. And wouldn't you? Is it not perfectly clear enough? And this I call Running Away. Around this time, Stephen Sondheim turned 80, and I was listening to a lot of show tunes, and so I wrote a show tune for my son. Not yet set to music, it's waiting for one of you. Running Away. When he was 3, he said, tearful and sweet, that he would run away from home, but for the dread of having, all on his own, to cross the street. When he was 4 and a sophisticate, by then no mere beginner at leaving, casually he asked one evening, would it be okay if he ran away, right after dinner? Practical fellow, he had packed his little lamb and dog, for his head one pillow, a toy telephone, and set off alone. Where did he imagine he was going? No way of knowing. Every few weeks, months, years since then, he runs away again, so far without consequence. Gets halfway down the block, around one corner, and relents. 18 now, hand on the door, operatically heart sore, far bolder at bitching, at overreaching, heavy pack at one shoulder. Where he's bound or when or whether he'll come back, he still can't say. I've stopped beseeching, and I've started itching to let him run away. He's 20 now, it goes on and on. This is for Grace Paley, who, if you haven't read her short stories, go forth immediately and find her stories and her poems. I had the great honor of knowing her a bit the last decade of her life, and there's a story she used to tell on herself that, as far as I know, she never wrote down, but she told a lot of us. And so I took the core of it and embellished a little, and I turned it into a little story for her after she died, using her sort of alter ego character from throughout her career, this woman called Faith. She wrote a lot of faith stories. So this is called Elsewhere, a faith story for Grace Paley. What do you need to know? I mentioned Faith's 2 sons in here. And there's an untranslatable Yiddish word, but you'll get what it means. She woke up to a clinking sound like a stuck thought, as if there were some pestering obstacle in a story she wasn't writing that would work itself out in her sleep if she could pay attention enough. Foolish thought that it would happen like that, but it wasn't a thought, thought Faith. It was a dream, and a dream is not foolish. Not a bone in her body that was moving, but the eyes wake up in a hurry if they need to. It was her ring of house keys dangling over her face, and attached to the keys, an unwashed hand coming out of the sleeve of an unwashed shirt. And attached to both of those, in the half-dark, a young man standing at the side of her bed she had never laid eyes on in her life. Why wasn't she more afraid? She knew what had happened. She had done it again. Richard was always warning her, or Tonto, "Ma, you can't leave your keys in the door like that. What are you thinking of? Bringing the shopping in, or distracted at the mail as the door shuts behind. You're on West 10th Street in New York. This is not some anarchist Russia of your dreams. Your mind is elsewhere." She often liked her mind being elsewhere, but at the moment it was locked onto the peculiar here and now and what it might want from her, so she sat up, the keys almost brushing her face and then tugged out of reach. He had mostly a look of reproach at her foolishness on his face, too nervous to manage sarcasm or menace or any of the more criminal expressions. Then he held up a not very serious knife. He wanted her money, but it came out like the kind of pleading she used to get out of either of the boys when they came up short on a Saturday night. The hand with the keys was shaking more than dangling. It wasn't so much the loss of her sleep that made her weary, it was the sadness of that hand. He didn't smell so good. He looked 18 or so. "But I don't have money," Faith told him. "I'm a school teacher. What's the matter with you? Do you live around here?" "Yeah," he answered, "just over... Hey, I bet you got money someplace." Coming into her house in an hour like this with an inadequate weapon like the idiot in a folk tale. It made her wonder about the kid's mother, if he had one of those. In the end, she found $6 or so in change by looking into all of the desk drawers, in among the scraps of paper she had written things down on for untold years, to think about some more someday when she had a little time. Quite a few scraps that ought to be poems by now, and maybe were already. And here was another half-written story standing upright in her bedroom uninvited, the Schmendrick. Now she would have to run into him at odd times around the neighborhood forever, like an unfinished argument. She would have to choose to wonder, or not, how he was making his way. Heading out her door, he turned around, remembering his manners, and handed back the ring of keys. "This probably can't go on, you know," Faith said. "You could put your mind to something else if you wanted to. Have you thought about the community college?" Then she sat up for the rest of the end of that night, putting her mind to one of the vagrant scraps of old writing she had found. That part was Grace. He was not out the door, and she was doing college counseling. So that's Grace Taylor. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to read the piece that was in the Cincinnati Review. Or am I? I thought I had the page marked, for crying out loud.
176? No, 136?
Get out of here. Does someone know? 176?
136.
136. No, that's not true. I know it's like bad advice from the audience. Oh, here we go. 114. Not even close, dude. What the hell? Okay.
I've never read the issue like that.
Okay, fine. Well, you know, the editor's right there.
Is it really?
There'll be a quiz now.
Yeah. So, a few years ago, I was in Buenos Aires briefly, and one of the best days was I just kind of impromptu took the walk that the great writer Jorge Luis Borges must have taken hundreds of times from his apartment to the National Library, where he was head librarian for decades. And I felt like I was inhabiting a Borges story, and so I imagined walking with him to work one day, maybe in the 1960s. And there are little echoes of his various stories in here. And you probably know that he was going blind for much of his life and finally did go completely blind. So this is called Legend. He is walking to work like a man practicing his Sabbath through a labyrinth of his own making from the upper apartment at a dark corner of Maipú that he shares with his mother down Calle Florida. The day wrapped in cloud, the minutes cast an immovable spell, peering with darkening sight into the windows of imaginary shops at the astrolabes and sea charts, the alembics of alchemists. Passers-by saluting him with a slight formal bow and a buenos dias poeta, or with a firm clasp and a hand on his shoulder to exchange the day's predictions and remembrances. He recounts a dream of trouble with a mirror in it, and no matter where a dream in its guile has claimed to take place, he can always recall the precise intersection of his city that was its true location. Just past the cathedral, he has come awake to find himself walking beside. Here, it was here, at the corner of Rivadavia, where Florida becomes Peru, and he enters El Sur, the truest metropolis of his own legend. Away to his right-hand sign down the avenue, as he crosses it, the narrow tower, conceived by its maker, as the levels of Dante's ascent into his own paradise. In the dream, the man was mirrored by a face made of winnowed sand. And still inside the mirror, and still walking in a line, consisting of an infinite number of points on a plane, that is an infinite number of lines in the volume of space, that is an infinite number of planes within infinite dimensions unbeheld, he is surprised as ever to see the Biblioteca Nacional remake itself from nothingness and appear for him at the corner of Calle Mexico between Peru and Bolivar, the eternity of writing forever exceeding the eternity of his power to read it. He ascends the stone steps, the most fortunate man in his own world, the antic lettering above the door all indistinct to him as to whether this be heaven or hell, and he enters it. This is from a book I just finished in memory of my mother, who died 2 years ago after a long passage through Alzheimer's disease. Anyway, I'll read the last poem in the book, the title poem, and then the first one. This is called Deep Well. She gave me language and wanted nothing at all in return for it. What could I give her? Even after she had stopped speaking, I couldn't give it back. Letters of the alphabet falling like ash and settling in our hair, on our shoulders, every word that would never be said now. She wanted only what she had already and less of that. So that when I went nothing, when I managed to delude myself that I could relinquish it all this very moment, I suppose it's what I have from her as gift. What? To join her in death. Unconditional love. The dark side. Things began disappearing years ago, the contents of childhoods shaken out of boxes and given away. She knew we didn't need them, so she didn't ask, until by the end, even her travel diary was sucked into the pool of unremembering and lost. One day it was gone from its shelf. She would or could not say where. That precious dog-eared spiral stenographer's pad she had carried through every state but one for a span of 40 years. Nothing was precious. And one day, it was her wedding ring's turn to go, speaking of years. What was that moment like, of casting it away, if there was a moment? Unsentimental to a fault, or wary of sentiment, when the plainest moment of tenderness so easily made tears well up, I'd want to uncause them. It's true, I thought of her as a deep well, never to be seen into. She kept our secrets for us, as she kept her own. She preferred to be all right. When I happened to mention sitting by Dad's bedside at the hospice at the very end, that my wristwatch was broken and I'd need another, she reached over without a thought, pulled the Timex off his arm as he lay there in his coma, and handed it to me, saying, "Here, Dad's not going to need this one anymore." The way that in her dementia, in her travel outside the mind, she reached a positive regard for every moment that seemed like grace. A grace she'd always had, and more so now, entering any room for the 1,000th time saying, "This is so pretty in here." Eating her simple boiled or microwaved plate of lunch and pronouncing, like God, at the end of another day's creation, "This is really good." Until saying even that was not needed, leaving the world at peace, holding on to nothing. She's the one, you could say, who trained me to love books more than I loved people. They were more durably kind, staying the same or changing over time as they chose to, privately in my head. The one perfect way I found not to be here, but without going, which was a kind of salvation after all. You could say she threw out everything and at last herself. Still, I'm left with this, less complete than it used to be, but holding up bravely one life to another in its battered tin box, a set of wooden letters of the alphabet that she saved for me. Okay, the last one. So a few years ago, I was at a kind of an artist colony, and toward the end, I was kind of running out of steam, so I went around to the non-poets and asked for assignments. Like, just give me a poem assignment. Like, the painters came up with unbelievable things. But this playwright gave me a verse. He was writing a play about Afghanistan. He was reading the Quran, so he gave me a verse in the Quran. So I used it, and it's also embedded in the 5 stanzas of this. The verse is, "May God increase your kindness." May God increase your kindness. May you be generous on purpose and by accident. May you listen more than you speak. May you be only as afraid as you must. May you surrender to God this very instant. May your failures be useful. May you wake up wanting what you have. May you practice making peace with your dearest enemies. May joy increase with you where you go. May you remember your teachers. May you abandon your most favored lies. May you startle yourself. May you be loved and believe it. May you let a stranger save your life. May you let your child grow. May you renounce the last remnant of hatred toward your own worth. May you build something with your hands that will outlast your life. May your religion be kindness. May you speak tenderly with your dead. May spirit enter your unfilled places. May your mind be clear. May you be remembered as you are. May you honor time and let it pass. May God increase your kindness.
Thank you so much. Next up, we have Rebecca Bloyd.